Well, welcome back to the Neo Marketing Podcast. On this episode, we're going to talk about when corporations should engage in online memorialization.
Welcome to the Golden Group Neo Marketing Podcast, a bi-weekly discussion of modern business communication.
Kyle, how are you?
Fantastic. Good to see you today, Pritch.
Yeah, thank you. Better to be seen than viewed. That's
Back
how I
on
always
the
say.
Neo Marketing Podcast.
Back on the Neo Marketing Podcast. So recently, I had the opportunity at the International Public Relations Research Conference to co-present with one of my faculty colleagues, Dr. Jensen Moore, who's been doing a lot of work in what I consider to be a fascinating lane, and that's public mourning online and how people use the various online tools to involve themselves in the mourning process.
We're all connected now, 24/7, 365, not just on a television, but on smartphones and people's watches.
Absolutely. Well, and everything from, and she's done some really groundbreaking work in this area, but what spun off of that particular line of research was a project that she was kind enough to engage me on in terms of when organizations should enter that online public mourning space.
Sure.
So, lack of a title, but corporate memorialization, if you will. And so at this point, it's more or less a preliminary study, but interviews and focus groups with folks on when they've seen corporations involved in the memorialization process, and then to parse out from them what those particular folks thought was appropriate and inappropriate.
Interesting.
It is very to me, and some of the top line stuff that came out of that, and this of course will continue as a research stream, so it is preliminary data, but respondents found that it's okay for corporations to use the tagline or the hashtags in either a man-made or a natural disaster, as long as the messages have to do with comfort and support. We've got people volunteering, hashtag Houston
Right.
Strong. Resource centers or some aid centers that we're involved with helping hashtag.
No, there were multiple hashtag usage for the campfire camps in California and the wildfires in California.
Right.
And first it started with a generic hashtag, and then they started breaking it down into ways that people could reconnect with people that are displaced, find resources, news updates, etc. So the hashtag started getting subgroups, and even some celebrities were using their considerable influences, like James Wood and some other actors and people that have a big following in California with different hashtags in order to accomplish different things.
Yeah, it was interesting during the hurricanes in the southeast last year, or the year before. They actually became instructing information tweets,
Right.
Based on a hashtag in the area, again to help people. So that's an area that we really want to look at. But when is it appropriate for an organization to jump into, particularly when there's loss of life? And so folks found that the hashtag was a good way to connect. Unless you went too far and then you started over talking the hashtag and it became commercialism.
Became self-serving.
Absolutely.
Which goes back to a very basic tenet we talk about a lot on this podcast: authenticity. Being authentic, keeping it real, and your motivations being correct is paramount, because the public, we're sophisticated. We communicate with each other all the time via all these avenues and tactical devices. So we see through BS real quick.
Yeah. And very, very quickly.
Yes.
We use the discourse of renewal theory of crisis communications as the theoretical underpinning of this. And the reason is that one of the basic tenets of discourse of renewal is the community renewal, that the organization has a responsibility to help the community rebuild itself or progress, right? And so if you're paying attention to that and your messages are in that vein, you're going to be just fine. One of the quotes that I thought was But obviously, if you are the perpetrator of the particular disaster,
if you cause the problem.
if you cause the problem, you're not gonna get away with it. I'm trying to find this.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. It's a completely different reaction when you are the entity that caused the problem to begin with, whether it's accidental or oversight. It's never intentional, right? No one ever goes out to intentionally start people do, arsonists do, but
right.
Businesses don't try to create disasters or loss of life or property. Typically, it's either an accident happens, and these things happen in life and in business, or in the worst case scenario, the business has been negligent and allowed a situation to create what eventually became the accident, which became the problem.
And one of the examples that the respondents in a study mentioned repeatedly was BP and the Deepwater Horizon. Their messages suggesting sympathy and caring just absolutely, they got called out on it. One of the respondents said, and I love this quote, they were at fault and they're like, we're sorry for your loss. It was bullshit and they expected us to play along.
Well, and again, people see through bullshit real fast, right?
And respondents thought it was appropriate when that happened for the online audience to call them out.
Sure.
So, companies expect this. If you're not authentic in your communication, then you're going to get called out, and it could go as far as boycotts.
But authenticity and brand voice and community connection and being a corporate partner and a responsible corporate citizen, all of these things have to happen before the disaster, before the problem. Right. You have to be positive in order to survive a negative.
Well, yeah, and there's lots of stuff, building goodwill ahead of time before the crisis.
Otherwise, it's inauthentic.
It's inauthentic, exactly so. One of our conclusions, too, was that companies got to think about this now that they didn't have to think about before.
Certainly.
But they need a plan. When is it appropriate for us to engage? How are we going to engage? What kind of core messages?
Yes.
And our messages better reflect our corporate values.
Yes.
But have all that figured out ahead of time as well.
The best plans are made when there's no pressure and there's no expectations. That's why you do these things now. You don't wait for the problem and then figure out what to do with it, because the pressure itself and the immediacy and the speed now that we have to react. You can't wait till tomorrow morning for the press release. You have to tweet now. You got to get in front of a TV camera now. You can't wait for a strategy session. So you have to do these strategy sessions at a time of the year where nothing's happening, where it's not about your bottom line, but it's about what are our corporate values and how would we represent ourselves if things went poorly. This is insurance policies, right? You never want to use your insurance policy, but you're sure as the heck happy you had it before you needed it.
Well, and again, kind of coming back to the reason for this study is, when is it, if you're not at fault, when is it appropriate for you to enter into that space?
That's a good question.
And you have to put some time and thought into that ahead of time. Otherwise, it's like everything else we've said, if you don't do the research and the planning ahead of time, then you're just kind of throwing stuff against the wall to see if it sticks. And in this case, if you engage inappropriately, it's going to blow back on you.
Worse.
And that's a self-inflicted
So
wound.
you made it worse.
You did.
So if you go too fast, you can make it worse. You go too slow, you can make it worse. You do nothing at all, you could make it worse. And if you try to please everybody at all times,
right,
you make it worse.
You make it worse. And the haters are always going to come out first.
It's going to happen.
Right. But then, and you were sharing a story about a company that has gotten to the point where they have their white knights come in. They don't have to say anything.
Right.
And that's exactly where we want to be.
But that doesn't start on day one. No. You have to develop that culture with your audience. Again, it's going to be authentic. It's going to happen. It's not something even that you could say, we're going to wait for this to happen. You actually watch it happen. Yes. And then understand how your audience, pro and con, and people that like you and people that don't, are going to react. And then you just do your role of doing the least amount of damage. Right. If your fans want to take over and defend you, have at it. That's fantastic.
And arm them with the
because
information.
Again, it's authentic to the experience. Right. If your fans won't come to your defense because you just don't have them yet, or it's just not something in the way that they're built, you're going to have to do it yourself. But it has to be coming from a place of we acknowledge what's happening and we're working to not let it happen again, not a deflection of blame when you deserve it, Because if you own up when you have a failure, and this is for businesses, but folks, use this in your career too, and in your life in general too. Trust me on this one. If you own up when you have a failure, big or small. Now, and again, there's legal issues, right? If you go and do something illegal, I'm not saying go on the TV cameras and say you did it, but when you own up to making a mistake or having a failure or just not going far enough in protecting the scenario, it makes it plausible to, when you are not at fault, to defend yourself vehemently.
Right.
You cannot stand up and say, I absolutely did not do this. I will not accept this responsibility. It wasn't us. We're not going down this path. If you have a history of always saying that. But if you have a history of, yes, we could have done better. Yes, this happened on our watch, and here's what we're doing and learning from the process. If you have a history of engaging and admitting when you're wrong, when you're not wrong, you can truly defend yourself.
Right. But this is a whole new area that I don't think we've thought about, that we need to think about.
I think it's definitely the difference between doing business in 2019 than previously.
It absolutely is, because even a year ago, nobody had to think about, should I engage in and memorialize this disaster? I didn't have anything to do with a hurricane, so should I engage? When I engage, what should I do? How should I engage? Mm-hmm. These are all things that you didn't have to think about even a year ago.
Well, not even that. Obviously, there are things you have to think about. If you have a business that does things, if you're in construction, if you're in the oil and gas industry, if you're in things that might be dangerous or puts people in peril, you always have to consider how your response would be if something goes wrong.
Right.
But you also have to understand, if you own a piece of property, if you own the building with employees, if you engage the public, there might be a crime that happens that has nothing to do with you, that's simply in your physical area, geographical area. It may just happen nearby. Maybe someone who works for you does something that's completely separate from your business but draws this attention. Right. There's all these variables that could draw negative attention to you that you have to consider. What's our response to this going to be? Right. Because the idea of we could just deflect or not address, it just doesn't happen anymore.
Right. The other interesting thing is that the thoughts and prayers messages didn't resonate.
Right.
They were inauthentic, considered inauthentic. So, sorry, business owners. I'm sure you're sitting there going, Pritchard, you idiot. If it doesn't involve me, I don't have to respond.
Right.
Well, not so fast.
You must pay attention to your audience.
Well,
you must pay attention to what's happening around
you. And the audience
and
expects you to engage in these kind of conversations now. I'm sorry, sitting on your duff and watching a natural disaster unveil and sitting on the sidelines isn't an option for business today. It's just not an option today.
For me, the less is more approach to this, obviously you don't want to wade into things that you don't need to if you can avoid it. But if you're swept up in it, if your business is either the primary focus or is on the peripheral because of what you do or the area or whatever it is, you just can't let it slide. You have to have some sort of response, and that response should have been thought about before there was a problem.
A long time ago.
Yeah.
And indeed, there is an opportunity here for your corporate values to shine, even if you're not directly involved. But it's got to be corporate values that are meaningful, that help the community to recover, that are positive and comforting, and maybe some instructing comments about where to go to get resources and
every
whatnot.
bit of that's going to go back to the key of authenticity.
Authenticity, absolutely.
If you do that beforehand and you are actually developing corporate values that are good for the employees and for your people that you work with, that you sell to, and the communities that you're in, then the authentic response based on your core values is easy.
Yes.
If your core values are, and this is a stereotype, right, but make money and screw over the little guy, then you're going to have a hard time responding to a disaster or negative event.
Right.
But if you have true value, true corporate culture, true ideas about what your business stands for outside of an economic scenario, then the response should be easy.
Well, and the myth is that a crisis will help you build character.
Right.
No, the crisis reveals lack of character.
And believe it or not, sometimes even a very negative event that's your fault. I think BP is a great example. Like everyone agreed that they failed at that well and it caused the pollution and the accident and everything that came along with it. You have an opportunity to completely destroy your business with a poor response.
Yeah.
You have an opportunity to come back to a neutral position, to sort of where you started, with a great response when it's your fault. But you also have the opportunity to maybe even go further and draw new, almost fans, if you will, or at least people who have a respect for your business if you respond in the right, authentic, thinking about the community, not thinking about your bottom line response.
Right. And in the end, the way they handled the recovery efforts, the commercials that they were running, and I get it, they were paying for those commercials.
Sure.
But the thought that, hey, I live here, I work for BP, I want my community to recover, and I'm helping to try and make that happen. I think over time, history will show that was the right kind of response for them.
It really was. And even the people that would say, I'm not interested in helping BP be a great corporate partner, I think what they did was just deplorable, and I just have no time for them. That recovery effort, those responses, those TV commercials, etc., they only worked for the people that were willing to be open to it,
right,
because they were values that were established before the disaster. And they
they
weren't just simply saying it. And the people in the commercials were being authentic because they were real people.
Yeah. There you go. I'm sorry. One more thing for businesses to think about, but I think you've got to. This is business in 2019.
That's
right?
Roll this into your strategic planning. Roll this into your big picture ideas. You should be thinking about the big picture as much as you think about your day-to-day and your execution and your quarterlies, etc. And so this is another example of a chance to reevaluate your core values, what your business stands for, how your corporate culture, and if you're doing it right along the way, over and over and consistent, then these responses will be easy when and if it happens.
The other thing, and I'm going to tease this because I'm going to be talking about this as we go forward this year, is the switch from corporate social responsibility to corporate social value. Yet to be defined, yet to be explored, but just the wording, it's the subtle change in wording from responsibility to value is to me going to be a very interesting kind of journey to unravel.
I have a feeling that'll be a topic of a podcast or two or three in the future.
Exactly so. So there you go. That's it for today. Sorry, added to your list of planning things, but hey, that's how we try and make you better. So give us your thoughts. If you want to raise the bullshit flag on this, that's great, because we would love to discuss it. It makes us better, makes us think more deeply, helps us to understand what you're concerned about. So give us that feedback. Until next time, ciao.
Good luck.